The RCBS X-Die virtually eliminates the need to trim your brass after an initial trimming. In this video, we're going to put it to the test with 223. Hey guys, Gavin Gear here from UltimateReloader.com. If you're like me, brass prep is one of the things that you like least about reloading rifle ammunition, and that's where the X-Die comes in. This is the RCBS X-Die. I've got one here in 223. I also have one here in 308. It's also a small base die, so if you're sizing down previously fired military brass, I think this would be a great way to go. So what I'm going to do is kind of give you an overview of the die. We'll get it set up, and then we're going to do a whole bunch of firings with the 223 trainer to check how much brass growth we get following the instructions carefully. So I've already cleaned this die. I'll just show you what we've got here. It looks pretty much like a normal full-length sizing die. We've got the Mandrel, which has an expander ball. We're just going to get this kind of screwed in until we have between a 1/16 of an inch and an 1/8 of an inch protruding from the bottom side there. I've already got my Rock Chucker Supreme set up with the appropriate shell holder here. What we're going to do for each firing is we're going to resize and deprime with the X-Die. We're going to charge with the Charge Master link. We're going to prime on the RCBS Rock Chucker Supreme, and then I have the partner press over here set up for seating so that I don't have to keep swapping dies. That should be a pretty good setup. Okay, so for setting up the die, what we're going to do, and this is straight out of the instruction manual, so we're going to raise the ram to the top and we're going to lower the die until it contacts the shell holder. Okay, now we're going to go between an 1/8 and a 1/4 turn extra to feel that cam over. That feels good. We will lock the lock ring down so that it stays put. Okay, now we're going to take a case. So this is a case that I tested our load with. We've got 24.4 grains of Varget, and we're using a Hornady 75 grain AMAX bullet for this particular load. And so I'm going to apply a little bit of lube and we'll get ready for our sizing. I like to use a generous amount of lube the first time I use a die. That way I kind of prime it with lube. I have cleaned this with mineral spirits and blew it out with compressed air. So we should be good to go for kind of our initial setup here. So we're going to drive the ram all the way to the top. I can feel the resistance there. And then screw the Mandrel down until hard resistance is felt. Like that. Okay, now we're going to lock this lock ring. And that should be the setup that we can use now for this test. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to trim 20 thou off of where we would be at max 1.760. So we're going to be at 1.740. I'm going to chamfer and deburr. Then after we fire each time, we're going to size and deprime, reprime right here on the press, charge with powder, seat a bullet, and just measure the case each time and see how much elongation we get. So I'm going to go trim. Okay, so we've sized with the X-Die for the first resizing. This was virgin brass, fired it once, sized it once. I just trimmed it down to 1.740 inches on the dot. So we're 20 thou under max case length. And so what I'm going to do each time here is we will prime. I'll probably do this right after sizing for subsequent loadings. We can prime right here. Love that with this little bar that flips over. Okay, so we've got the case primed. We'll put that in our block. We're going to add the powder. That's going to go ahead and charge again. There we go. Grab our bullet. Go over to do a powder check visually, of course. I know I just poured it in. And seat the bullet. Okay, so we're going to go out and fire this for the second time. So here's the case. It's been fired twice. I'll go ahead and size this a second time, and we'll see what kind of growth we got on that first X-Die resizing. Second, I should say. The first after trimming, really. Okay, so we've got, it should grow a few thousandths and then stabilize, 1.745. So we had 5 thou growth there. So I'm going to keep loading and shooting and logging the results, and I'll check in with you when we have something to share. Well, the testing is done. We actually ran the test 2 different times. Let me tell you what happened. So we started with the die setup exactly as I showed you in the setup part of this video. And we did a number of firings. We got to 8 firings before we were at just over 1.760 inches. And I called RCBS and I talked to them. And it turns out that in their testing, they were seeing 20 plus firings and no need to trim. So I thought, you know what? I'm gonna look at this setup in a little bit more detail here. So what we did was we prepared a round, fired it, and then went through the same setup process, but I turned the mandrel down about another half turn total, I'm guessing. I did multiple sizings and I looked at the overall length of the case. And what I did was I continued to crank the mandrel down until I saw the actual case overall length go down just a little bit. So when we first fired the case, it was at about 1.744, I think, something like that. And the first time I resized it after firing, I cranked down the mandrel until it went down to 1.7425. So 2.5 thousandths longer than what we trimmed it to. And this turned out to be the magic formula. And in, alignment with what the instruction manual says, I made sure to look very, very carefully for bulging kind of right at the junction of the shoulder to the body. Because what you can do is you can shove it so far down with the mandrel that it will bulge and then your rounds won't chamber, right? Well, we never saw the bulging. So it turned out we needed a little bit more mandrel crank down. And what we did was we completely reran the test with a separate piece of brass, this piece of brass right here. And if you look at the data, it's pretty amazing what we saw. First off, we did a total of 20 firings and we never trimmed after that first trim. And what we saw was, after that initial 1.7425, it didn't really grow even a full thousandth until the 8th firing, which is pretty amazing. And then if we follow, at 14 firings, we're at 1.7445, so we're 4.5 thousandths over. Remember, we can go to 1.760, so we're still 15 thou under. It's really, really amazing. 1.745 for 15, 1.745 for 16, 1.745 for 17, 1.7445 for 18, 1.7445, and 1.7445 at 20, right? So after 20 firings, we didn't grow more than 4.5 thousandths. And in talking with RCBS, what they relayed to me was, this is very much what they saw. And ultimately, they saw cases yield and fail before they had the need to trim. And so this is, I think, a really, really well-designed product. And I think it's really compelling for those of you that want to resize your brass and not to have to worry about trimming after that first trim, right? You do need to do that first time. You need to get the brass resized and flowed and fully fire formed to your chamber and take that first trimming. I'm going to take this 308 die and we're going to examine the parts of this mandrel in a little bit more detail so that you can understand how this die works. So the interior of the X-Die is shaped pretty much like any full-length sizing die. But what we've got here is a mandrel section that will slip into the case mouth, and then there's this shoulder, right? And the diameter beyond that is much larger. It's about the about the dimension of the OD of the case, right? So there's a hard shoulder right here that hits when the case comes up, and it doesn't allow it to propagate. It doesn't allow it to grow. And so that basically just prevents elongation. The brass kind of flows back. Whatever happens, it's not stressing the brass because we got 20 firings out of a 223. And it's not lengthening appreciably. You get almost infinite number of sizings without the need to trim, all because of this little shoulder right here. So the moral of the story that I learned is it is all about the setup, and the directions are a great general set of guidelines, but I think it pays to experiment a little bit if you want to go real extreme with how many resizings you're going to get without the need to trim, right? So this was a really fun test, and you know, I'm curious to continue using these X-Dies with different brands of brass. We used Lapua here. We used 24.4 grains of Varget and 75 grain Hornady AMAX bullets, some stuff that we had on hand here. Varget is a great powder for 223, but I think it'd be interesting to do the same kind of tests with different sort of grades of brass as well. Like, what about once fired military brass in 7.62x51, essentially 308, or other head stamps, other brands, that sort of thing, to see, you know, how different types of brass within the same cartridge family would respond to the repeated sizings and essentially the torture test that we put this through. So here's what I'd like to know. Are you using X-Dies? What cartridge are you using them with? And have you seen similar results here where pretty much you trim once and basically you're done? Share your results. Drop a comment. We'll start that discussion in the comments section. That concludes this video, and that means it's time to wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, we're on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, where we've got unrestricted content, and Instagram. Make sure to follow us on all those channels. Ultimate Reloader also has a commercial solutions division serving law enforcement, the military, and the gun industry. We have some unique capabilities, including a comprehensive suite of recoil testing and evaluation capabilities, trigger profiling, and more. If you're interested in custom rifles like what we build here on the channel or gunsmithing services, you're going to want to go to rifles.ultimatereloader.com and get on the wait list. Thanks again for watching.